A really exciting new theory was put out by the LA Times last week that says that the Black Dahlia Killer and the Zodiac are the same person. Just over 20 years ago, a man named Steve Hodel, a retired LAPD officer, published this book called Black Dahlia Avenger, in which he claimed that his father was the Black Dahlia and to have definitively solved the Black Dahlia case. The book got so much attention and a lot of praise, and it was endorsed by very high-ranking people in the LAPD and in the district attorney's office. In subsequent sequels to the book, Hodel also said that, by the way, my father was also the Zodiac Killer. Well, one thing led to another, and over time, the apparently compelling evidence that was put forth by Steve Hodel was debunked and discredited, and a lot of the people that lent their names and their reputations to endorsing the book actually had to take it back. This exact phenomenon is repeating itself yet again 20 years later, but this current theory is different from the Hodel hypothesis, but actually the evidence is a lot weaker, and the theory is a lot more ridiculous. Okay, so I'm really excited to get into the ins and outs of this new, very exciting Black Dahlia Zodiac theory with you. I just want to unfortunately annoy you and ask you to please like or subscribe or leave a comment below if you're so moved and if you enjoy this video, because it helps us, it helps our YouTube channel to grow. And by helping our YouTube channel to grow, you're actually helping our real life brick and mortar small business that still exists and is running in LA on the streets and giving murder tours to our lovely mourner. In addition, you are welcome to check out our really kick-ass merch. You can get all of that at our website with the information in the description below. It's very understandable to want to link major serial killers together in very neat cases. I think that there's something about the human brain that craves neatness and solutions. But on top of that, who doesn't want to discuss Black Dahlia and the Zodiac in the same conversation for a very long period of time and for no real good reason? I mean, I do. The other thing is that if you're not correct, it's very rare that there's an actual downside. Even Steve Hodel did sell a huge amount of books, and he made a, I'm sure, profitable TV series. And although the Hodel theory is widely discredited and sort of sneezed at these days, he did well by it. And George Hodel actually is still a Dahlia suspect at large, not necessarily because there's strong evidence against him, but there's just not really any evidence to formally disqualify him. So why not? Why not put forth this theory that includes a really, really cool sounding cipher and the Zodiac Killer and also OMG, the Black Dahlia Killer? Regardless of whether it's right, it's gonna sell. So it's sort of win-win-win for everybody except for Truth and Elizabeth Short and the Zodiac victims. No big deal. I don't want you guys to think that I am being shade-driven or trying to cast aspersions or talking trash about my colleagues. I really respect everybody in this space, and I genuinely like all of you that I've met. I just have issue when somebody puts forth a theory which they probably don't think on every level with every fiber of their being is real, but they stand by it as being definitive, because I think that does a disservice to the true crime community and also to the victims and their survivors. And I can tell you just on a personal level that any time that I'm touring the Black Dahlia in one of the Graveline limos and we get to the Hodel house, I have to sort of rein myself in and hide my frustration and annoyance, because normally half of the limousine is convinced that George Hodel was the Black Dahlia Killer, and then when we get into the details about why, we kind of disabuse them of this notion. But it is not a victimless thing to put misinformation out there into the ecosphere, especially these days when it's so easy to do. The genesis of this theory is that this guy, Alex Baber, who runs Cold Cases of America, was trying to decipher one of the Zodiac ciphers that has never been solved, Z13, and he was able to, using code breaking skills and an AI model, come down to a solution, and he found one name, and voila, what a coincidence, that one name was also a Black Dahlia suspect. And then he looked at more and more information, the guy's background, handwriting samples, a naked drawing of a woman that he had done right before he died, and lo and behold, everything just fell into place. And this guy is now positive that the same person who murdered the Black Dahlia also murdered all the Zodiac victims and was the Zodiac. What is the problem with this? Well, everything. The theory makes no sense and it holds no water. But all you have to do is scratch the surface a little bit and the entire thing collapses. So let's get to the individual pieces of evidence and why I feel that way. But before we get into the evidence itself, I just want to take a step back. What do we know about, just without studying, the Dahlia killing and the Zodiac killing? They're pretty much like polar opposites. It's hard to think of two sets of murders or victims that are more disparate than those two. The Black Dahlia killing is a crime of passion, and the Zodiac killing seemed to be very cold and calculated and impersonal. The Black Dahlia killing was gratuitous. It was over the top. It was posthumous mutilation that was done for some sort of weird, perverse, psychopathic reason. The Zodiac killing seemed to be very methodological and also to be about just dominating and killing and then fleeing. The Dahlia killing was done by somebody who had to have a great deal of medical expertise, and the Zodiac killing doesn't have any example of that. There's no reason to think that he wasn't also a doctor, but the Dahlia killing had to have been done by somebody who had advanced medical knowledge and probably surgical. Another thing to look at is just the general nature of the killer's behavior. The Zodiac left behind numerous instances of fingerprints. He was sloppy. He didn't get caught, but he also didn't do things totally cleanly. The Black Dahlia killer was very meticulous. He was unusually precise, and he was excellent about burying his track. It's been a lot harder to identify the Black Dahlia killer because both the body of Elizabeth and the parcel that was delivered to the LA Herald Express after she was murdered were meticulously wiped. There was one dilute drop of blood that was found at the Black Dahlia murder scene, and that's it. There was none in her body, there was none in the grass. It was totally drained, like completely, before it was transported to the site. Zodiac, not so. Zodiac killings were super bloody, and there were a lot of fingerprints. They weren't ever successfully matched to one of the suspects. However, they were left behind. I know that you guys might say that the Zodiac sometimes claimed that he did that on purpose. Maybe he did. But even so, that in itself is a behavioral difference then between the man who slayed the Black Dahlia and the Zodiac. Furthermore, the Dahlia killing is not the starting out amateur killing for any serial killer if he was a serial killer. The Dahlia killing is the grand finale. Is it possible that the Black Dahlia killer and Zodiac killer started with Elizabeth and then got less extreme and less violent? Yeah, of course. But is it the rule? No, it goes against the rule. Look at Jack the Ripper, look at Dahmer. Every time that they got more momentum and they got more immunity from the police, their crimes became more heinous and more gruesome. So you would almost expect that if these killings were linked, the Black Dahlia killing would then have to come later than the Zodiac. So that's another thing that I just take issue with. Finally, there's this huge time break. And for me, that's kind of the biggest broad inconsistency, which is just that serial killers also generally, not always, again, generally don't take 22 years off between their victims. You can look at the clusters of bodies that were committed by West Coast serial killers, and you will see that there's not really more break time, with one exception. There's not more break time than 10 years. The one exception is the Grim Sleeper, but because that was so rare, he was actually called that. And on top of that, most people don't think that he stopped killing just because his murders went undetected. So it would be really weird if somebody killed the Black Dahlia, was dormant for 22 years. I think what they say in the articles is that he was committing auto fraud instead, and then he decided to become the Zodiac Killer. This, for me, just forensically, behaviorally, is really weird and problematic. The handwriting and the diction were broadly looked at. They were kind of taken together by Baber when he was comparing the various documents that were left behind by the killers as well as Merrill/Margolis. There's one assumption that was made which we actually have to discuss, which he did not discuss, but in the podcast, Baber says, and I'm quoting him, "I was able to identify similarities between the wording and the choice of words between the Black Dahlia Avenger letters, which some people said were crank letters. We now know that they weren't." I don't know that. I don't know who knows that. Maybe apart from Baber. I have tried to find some sort of validity to the Black Dahlia Avenger letters not being hoaxes or being known to be authentic, and there's none. I wish that he would have mentioned how we know that they weren't rather than just sort of glossing over that, because a lot of this analysis is based on Black Dahlia Avenger letters. And even within the Black Dahlia Avenger letters, there's sort of this hierarchy where the first one is the one that is thought by most people to be the likeliest to be authentic, if any of them are, but then all the subsequent ones are almost certainly frauds or copycats. Even if we're gonna operate on this assumption generously, that the Black Dahlia Avenger letters are authentic, we do run into another problem, which is that they were written in caps. And this is a problem that Steve Hodel ran into with Black Dahlia Avenger when they sent it to another fancy handwriting analyst who kindly refused to rule out that it was George Hodel that was the Black Dahlia Avenger. He also said, "Due to the lack of lowercase printing, I'm unable to positively identify the Black Dahlia Avenger samples as those of Hodel." Again, if you want to be generous and say, okay, so maybe he was in an uppercase mood, and then later on in his life, and when he became Marvin Merrill, and then when he became the Zodiac, he decided to use upper and lowercase. You can pretty easily spot some big handwriting inconsistencies. I wouldn't even think that you would need to submit these to an expert, because the handwriting is just, for me on the surface, it's very obviously committed by somebody else. First of all, there's a real definitive sort of distinct slant to all of the Zodiac writings in his letters, which you don't see in the Black Dahlia Avenger. There's all caps except for the I's in the Black Dahlia Avenger letters, but we see capital I's, uppercase I's in the actual Zodiac letters. And I noticed in particular that both the capital A and the number 2 in both the Black Dahlia Avenger and the Zodiac writings are very distinct from each other. So look, I'm not an expert, as I said, but on the surface, it seems very hard for me to believe that these were written by the same person. We're about to get into the next piece of evidence, which is the smoking gun, and part of the smoking gun includes some handwriting. There is the word Zodiac that was sort of using some fancy forensic methods or infrared, I don't remember what the mentioned technique was detected to be hidden in a drawing that was found, that was given to Baber by Merrill's son. And the word says Zodiac, allegedly. To me, it doesn't look necessarily like it says Zodiac, but, again, being generous, saying that the word says Zodiac. This word does not match either the Black Dahlia Avenger letters or the Zodiac letters. Now, I haven't looked at any Marvin Margolis samples. I don't think that there's been any that has been officially released, although samples have been turned over to Baber. But if you can't link the Black Dahlia Avenger and the Zodiac, then the whole theory kind of falls apart. The so-called smoking gun is put forth by Baber and by Connolly in the podcast, which, side note, but also kind of funny and ironic, is that Connolly's name, who does the podcast, the Killer in the Code, about this latest theory, is the top of the blurb for Black Dahlia Avenger, which I think he mentioned was taken back. He had to actually retract that endorsement, or at least he says he regrets it. So ironic that he's now backing this one. There's this drawing that is allegedly of Elizabeth Short. I mean, it is of a woman named Elizabeth because it says Elizabeth, and it's a woman's torso from sort of like the abdomen up. This piece of evidence was so ridiculous, I'm not exaggerating, that I wasn't sure that I was looking at the right drawing. I was looking so hard for what the podcast and what the articles and what Baber says is in the drawing, but I didn't see it. That I was thinking that I was not looking at the right drawing, but it turns out that I was. There's just nothing there. The drawing allegedly shows some stab wounds that are in this woman's chest around the breast area, and they're blurred out, but you can see them when you look at the website. I don't know what kind of stab wounds these are. There's nothing to indicate that they are stab wounds except for your own projection. They could have been pieces of dirt. They could have been pieces of her hair that had fallen off. I think, as someone who draws a lot, that they were just basic hatch marks that were trying to show some indicators of the rib cage and the sternum area. But to say that there's stab marks on this drawing of a woman with a naked chest when there's literally nothing there is literally to tell you, don't believe your lying eyes. It's preposterous. On top of that, like as if we needed more, this woman looks nothing like Elizabeth Short. This is a woman who has totally distinct features, different age, different face, different hair. So Elizabeth is only the most common name in the world. And Meryl's son actually said, which again, this was like downplayed, but said that his dad, around the time he made this drawing, had been dating a woman named Elizabeth, which was like way after the Black Dahlia was murdered. The kind of like giveaway to me that these guys even know that this is ridiculous is that they tried to explain why, although there's stab wounds and like blood stains on her chest, there's no depiction of the famous Glasgow grin that was sliced into Elizabeth's cheeks or any lacerations around her head and neck that were there. And they said that because it would have been too obvious. So they do call this drawing the smoking gun and Meryl's deathbed confession. But on the other hand, it would have been too obvious if he put all of Elizabeth Short's injuries that he inflicted on her. So he just did the stab wounds in her chest, and then he hid the word Zodiac in her hair, and that was his deathbed confession so that he could be sure that he was discovered, but only after he died. Like, are you kidding me? And then they launch into Marvin Margolis when he was still known as Margolis, and Elizabeth Short's relationship. They claim that it was adversarial, that Elizabeth was terrified of him, that they spent a few days together in his apartment with their friend and Elizabeth's friend, and that she was so upset by her experience with him that she not only left the apartment, but she fled to San Diego. And that there were 2 women and a man that were seen chasing Elizabeth. This is true, but that they were Bill Robinson and Margolis and maybe another one of Elizabeth's mutual friends that went to chase her. So, OMG. Okay, first of all, there's no evidence that Margolis and Elizabeth were romantically involved. All that we know for sure, is that Marvin Margolis, Bill Robinson, Elizabeth Short, and her friend Marjorie Graham met up on Hollywood Boulevard one day in October of 1946, and they moved in together. They stayed together in Margolis's aunt's apartment, which was room 726 of the Guardian Arms. We pass in on our Black Dahlia tour, we always have. And that after that, they left. I don't know, maybe could it have been because like none of them were on the lease? Maybe could it have been because Marjorie wanted to go back to Boston and she left the next day? Maybe could it have been because none of them were paying rent? I mean, There's a lot of reasons that they could have left apart from that Elizabeth and Margolis had a sexual relationship, because actually what we do know is that Elizabeth slept in the couch while the three, Margolis, Graham, and Robinson, slept on the bed. And when they all left, Elizabeth ended up going back to her acquaintance Mark Hansen's apartment, who was another big suspect, his house. And guess who walked her there and asked if she could stay? Marvin Margolis. So not only did she stay with Mark Hansen for a while after that, it didn't last, but before she fled to San Diego and after she stayed with Mark Hansen, she then stayed at the Chancellor Apartments on Cherokee. So to say that Elizabeth fled to San Diego because of some weird traumatic relationship she had with Marvin Margolis, it's nonsense. Now, like I mentioned, this leitmotif of Elizabeth being chased by two men and a woman shortly before her death is something that we see, I think, predominantly two times in the case. One of which is when she's in San Diego before she comes back with Red Manley to the Biltmore. And then another one is sort of debated because it takes place during the Lost Week. And the Lost Week was allegedly when Elizabeth was kidnapped between January 9th and January 14th, when she was thought to have been killed, and then her body was discovered the next day, because nobody saw her. But there is a theory that she had been seen by a number of people who were credible in that week in various parts of town. And the most notorious sighting of this was when Elizabeth was at the bus depot, the Greyhound bus station, on the 14th, and she was running in tears, and she basically accosted this policewoman and said, "Help me, they're trying to kill me. He's trying to kill me, my old boyfriend who was a former serviceman." And the woman walked her back to the bar where she was allegedly having drinks, and she waited there, and then a few minutes later saw Elizabeth leaving for the last time before she was discovered with two men and a woman from the bar, and they were kind of drunk, and the policewoman asked her if she was okay, and she said, "Yes, I'm going to meet my parents at the Greyhound station," and she was never seen again. And then this other two men and a woman motif was when Elizabeth was staying in San Diego, and she was not home at the place where she was crashing, and two men and a woman came looking for her, and when that message was relayed to her, Elizabeth supposedly got very weird and uncomfortable. So are Bill Robinson and Marvin Margolis men? Yeah. Was Marjorie Graham a woman? Yes. Was this other roommate of hers that allegedly knows them, Lynn Martin, a woman? Yes. Is there any other reason to think that they were the two men and a woman that were pursuing Elizabeth? Motive? No. Nothing. It's just basically let's connect these dots. It's a lot of, here's a coincidence, let's line it up. But here's the kicker. This controversy about there being a lost week is kind of what Marvin Margolis' official alibi hinges on, because LAPD said although he was initially deceptive, Marvin Margolis did have an alibi for when Elizabeth disappeared, but allegedly not for when she died. So if you're going to believe the Lost Week narrative, then you can believe his alibi, because it means that Elizabeth wasn't accessible and that Marvin Margolis was not the man who kidnapped her. But if you do think that Elizabeth was seen elsewhere during the Lost Week and that this Merrill McBride's testimony is authentic, then you can say, okay, well, maybe he doesn't have an entire alibi, because maybe at the end of the Lost Week, he did get in touch with Elizabeth Short and he did do something nefarious to her. So this explanation has two problems. One is that Merle McBride recanted her story almost immediately after she reported it to the papers. And the second problem is that the only reason that some people think that it is still credible, because she did tell it again in her 90s before she passed away, is because it showed up in Black Dahlia Avenger. So if you want to believe the fact that there was no Lost Week, which I love to believe, and I love to think that, the Dugout Cafe where Elizabeth was last seen is coincidentally at the Hotel Cecil. I love that, but I also acknowledge that it may not be true because it came from Black Dahlia Avenger. Now to the cipher. This is what I think is the big enabler of this theory, because it's very easy for people like you and me that haven't been to cryptography school or served in intelligence or have PhDs in math to think that somebody might be able to solve the Zodiac cipher in a way that is very sophisticated and rigorous, and therefore it's hard for us to question the solution of Marvin Merrill. But what I want to show you is that actually that is also an illusion. Off the bat, the Z13 cipher in itself inherently is not solvable. And this is very intuitive, because if you have a 13-letter symbol cipher, which is someone's first and last name, and it's not tied to any of the other decoded ciphers, there's literally infinite possibilities. And sure enough, if you go and you look into this on Google or read about it on Reddit, there are thousands of potential solutions for the Z13 cipher, which are not Marvin Merrill. I personally think that it was the Zodiac mocking the authorities, because it's ridiculous to think that anybody would ever successfully be able to decode a 13-letter symbol that is somebody's name. There's also a similar theory, which is that if you do decode it, it says Zodiac Killer or something ridiculous like Satan himself. But let's look a little bit more closely at this supposed AI model, and I think that things will become clear. The methodology as detailed in the podcast, and I looked very closely at the transcripts to make sure that I'm not getting anything wrong factually, was that there was a two-step process. One was to decode, and then the other one was to use forensic information to weed out all possible non-suspects by process of elimination. The only problem with this is that the AI model seems to have output 71 million possible names. And then the rest of them were whittled down by controlling for the forensic characteristics, i.e. the person who is not white is eliminated, the person who is not in the ages of 30s to early 40s is eliminated, height, etc. I would not think that any AI model, which is a decoder which gives 71 million possible solutions, which was like a third of the US population in 1970, is that helpful. Or anything really that takes any kind of expertise or specialized skill or experience. I think that this model was pretty much like very intensive data handling process of elimination. The other thing that is maybe interesting to point out is that guess how many of the very well-known Black Dahlia suspects have first and last names or first, middle, and last names which add up to 13 letters. And guess which one it was? Yes. It's funny, but I kind of did a double take when I heard Baber mention on the podcast the following quote, but he basically says as much. He just says that this is not the big eureka moment that we might think it is. He says the Z13 solution was never viewed as a piece of evidence. It was always viewed as an investigative tool. I knew that I would need some additional evidence to confirm the solution because I couldn't expect experts to support my findings based on a possible solution with numerous variables. Literally, there's thousands and thousands of possible solutions. So that's the decoding. That's the cipher that gave us Marvin Merrill. Now, with that gone, it means that all of the evidence that we're depending on is either the handwriting or the drawing or a few like little coincidences, really generous to say that they're coincidences, which we'll go through now. Okay, so what are these smaller details? Getting back to the Black Dahlia Avenger letters detail, Baber mentions that he has spent years putting together a database that compiles, it's a very interesting idea, a great idea, compiles a lot of serial killer correspondence into one location so that it can pick up on pattern detection and recognition and use that to try and help understand things about serial killers that we had previously not known. And that between the Zodiac letters, according to this model or this database, and the Black Dahlia Avenger letters, there's this really strange use of the word material. Only that's not in the main Black Dahlia Avenger letter, the secondary Black Dahlia Avenger letter, the tertiary Black Dahlia Avenger letter, and the example of the Black Dahlia Avenger letter, which I had never seen before that I could find online. So it's going to be in one of the lesser known letters that was sent to the authorities by the Black Dahlia Avenger, and that is like definitively not proven at all to be authentic. Then there's this amazing etymology of Zodiac, which is that because somebody, the night that Elizabeth Short was murdered, was going around Compton kind of frantically looking for a motel that would have access to a bathtub, presumably to exsanguinate her body and to prepare it to be moved and to do maybe whatever else gross things he did, 10 miles north of this cluster of hotels that saw the person, 10 miles north, in a whole other part of town, which is like right close to where the Black Dahlia was murdered, there used to be a motel called the Zodiac Motel. And that's the reason that we are supposed to believe that this man who killed Black Dahlia and the Zodiac calls himself the Zodiac. There's other correlations. I would normally call them spurious correlations, but a spurious correlation actually implies that there's like multiple data sets that correspond, and these are just points, and a lot of them are just really loose. There's both of them had a bayonet. The Zodiac Killer had a bayonet, as did the person who served with Marvin Merrill, who was in Japan, and he took the bayonet home with him, and I guess it was the same type of bayonet in World War II. Merrill had PTSD, so therefore he may have become a sadistic serial killer. Merrill knew how to dissect a body from his experience in the Navy and also in medical school. Okay, so this is worth getting into real briefly, because it is possible that Merrill had the medical knowledge that would have been needed to do what was done to Elizabeth. And that is actually the main reason that he's always been considered to be one of the sort of lesser Dahlia suspects. But I would actually wager to say that whoever did Elizabeth's bisection had more than just a couple dissection experience. What was done to Elizabeth Short is called a hemicorporectomy, and it's a very sophisticated, very serious surgical procedure that was done by like only a handful of surgeons in the region at the time. I don't believe that somebody that had been through a couple of dissections with human bodies would have had the ability to do a hemicorporectomy like what was done on Elizabeth Short. And then, guys, I'm really sorry. My cat is very hungry and he's very spoiled. But he has a great meow. So there's this book, The Most Dangerous Game. It's a short story that is really good. I recommend reading it. And it's referred to obliquely in the Zodiac letters. And supposedly, Elizabeth Short saw the movie of The Most Dangerous Game the week she was killed in a movie theater. Yes. I think that's a smoking gun. Where is Marvin Merrill's living son in all of this? Well, he's not really convenient to this theory. He's actually not convenient at all, because it turns out that the son is like pretty much not buying any of this. The son, who's the one who furnished this smoking gun drawing of Elizabeth and all of the handwriting samples, has called this speculative cesspool and fiction, and he's not really been heavily featured in the podcast. They give him one sentence mention that says he's not convinced and that's his prerogative, and then literally say moving on right afterwards. I pity the son, because when you're going up against the kind of machinery that he is now facing in this, what has been created by the excitement of this theory, it's going to be hard for him to unlive that reputational harm for his father. I mean, his father's not around to defend himself. Now the son is just kind of stuck with this baggage that he didn't really ask for. The other thing that the son mentions is that this supposed secret name change, which is the reason that we have Marvin Merrill, not Marvin Margolis, rather than it being because he killed the Black Dahlia and he needed to flee town, was because Margolis is a very Jewish name. And in the wake of World War II, for somebody who was an entrepreneur who did several jobs, he decided that he should use a name that sounded a little bit less Jewish. And to be honest, I've heard crazier things. There is a little bit that this theory has that's credible, that you could say supports it. Well, really one thing, which is that both the Zodiac and the Black Dahlia Killer wrote letters and or made phone calls to the authorities, the press, and the police. And that's true. They have that in common. I'm not sure that it makes them be the same man. Because do you know who else wrote letters to the authorities? Jack the Ripper, BTK, Son of Sam, Green River Killer, Long Island serial killer. You get the idea. It's not unique. I think if you just slow down for a moment, you will see that it's a mirage. It's like if you are looking at the Mona Lisa, and I don't know if you've ever noticed, because the Mona Lisa is so beautiful and it's so compelling, but the right side and the left side of her background don't align. But nobody notices because the Mona Lisa, she has this enchanting, mysterious smile. I sort of feel that way about this theory, or maybe one of those really weird like Renaissance fruit paintings where like you look close up and there's a perfect squash and then there's like a beautiful luscious looking strawberry and you really want to eat it, but then you back up and it's all forming a really weird looking man's face. I just feel that this theory has a lot of seemingly good parts to it, which when you drill down actually themselves aren't really inherently solid either, and makes this really sexy tie-in and solution. This is very similar to the phenomenon that happened when Steve Hodel published his book. I would say Steve Hodel's evidence was much more compelling. We have videos about that, which we will put into the description for you. But his theory was debunked by some people immediately. The evidence was debunked. The theory hasn't been debunked. He hasn't been disproven, but the evidence was debunked pretty much immediately. And Hodel's theory was discredited pretty soon after the book came out. And I think that this theory can be discredited basically right away. I hope it is for the sake of Marvin Merrill's survivors and also for the sake of Elizabeth's family. I would also just say, in empathy with those people that do want to think that this theory holds water, a lot of what is touted as the reason that we should believe this guy Baber is because he specifically does not have credentials. He says that he's an autodidactic polymath, which is like a really pretentious way of saying self-taught man of many skills. And that is very tempting because these days it's pretty easy to hate our institutions, to really resent credentials, to think that they're super overrated, like college and degrees and politicians. But I would just caution people that feel this way to also not throw the baby out with the bathwater and be wary of somebody who doesn't have any, because in order to really look into serious things like codes that have not been broken for almost 50 years by people that have doctorates and are skilled mathematicians, it's not something that you can just kind of come along and do because you spend some number of hours studying the forensics. This is something that is a serious field, and forensics and criminology is a serious field, and there's a lot of what I see as being very amateur mistakes and fudging. An example of this is that in one of the articles, Baber actually says that his theory is irrefutable. This is a quote. "It's just mathematically impossible for it to not be him." Mathematically impossible is the last digit of pi. Mathematically impossible is to take the square root of the number -16. Mathematically impossible is to divide 5 by 0. What's not mathematically impossible is that Marvin Margolis was not the Zodiac Killer. What's not mathematically impossible is that Marvin Margolis changed his name to Marvin Merrill to avoid anti-Semitism. Like, what's not mathematically impossible is that the Z13 has 1 or 2 or 10 million additional solutions besides Marvin Merrill. And to me, more ridiculous than that statement is the fact that this person erred enough to make that statement. Because I think that if somebody makes a mistake like that in a quote, then it's pretty hard to trust them with a really serious theory like this one. Is it possible that Marvin Margolis killed Elizabeth Short? Yeah. Is it possible that Marvin Margolis and Bill Robinson and maybe even Lynn Martin were the 2 guys and the girl that were pursuing Elizabeth for some ununderstandable, nefarious aim that ended up in her death? Yes, but a lot of things that are possible are not probable. And there's literally no more reason to believe that Marvin Margolis was either the Dahlia Killer or the Zodiac Killer, or less reason to believe after we hear this theory. The theory is just that, it's a theory, but it's a very non-credible one. I would just caution that we don't make the same mistakes that we made so easily 20 years ago with Black Dahlia Avenger and go down this whole rabbit hole all over again. There's no need, and it's not fair to Elizabeth, and it's not fair to her relatives, and above all, it's not fair to this poor guy, Rourke Merrill, who just wants to be in peace and have his father remembered as he knew him. So thank you for watching this week's Fireside Chiller. I can't believe you're still here. If you are, I'm really, really grateful. Your support and your viewership means the world to me, and I'm really, really honored to have it. Check out some of our other Fireside Chillers. Sign up for your free LA Crimes delivery if you want to have a pulse on what's going on in LA true crime at all times at graveline.rip. And of course, come visit us in LA. Come take a murder tour in a funeral limousine with myself or one of our just divine guides. And above all, remember, you only die once.